Teachers of Reddit, what's the worst fight you had to break up? My mom had two 7th graders using chair legs to fence each other. The question asked for worst fights, not best. Substitute teacher here. I was randomly assigned for the very last period of the day to a difficult class. All of these kids were enormous. Like, maybe they were football kids? All I know is my petite self wasn't even shoulder level with these kids. So in a classroom full of enormous dudes, a few in the back kept picking on one kid in the front. The seriously huge kid stood up and charged at the super big kids in the back, who all stood up, ready to fight. My super lame reaction was to slam my tiny hands on the desk and yell, "Excuse me. Back in your seats please." Double quote. They all just sort of stopped and looked confused. And then sat back down. No fight. No problem. Nobody was more surprised than me. I ended up leaving them some good notes for their teacher because honestly, any enormous guys who stop their big ass fight just because some tiny lady in a cardigan asks them to sit down, well, they can't be all bad. Actual teacher here. It was after school and I was headed to the copy room. On the way is the cafeteria, which had been cleared of all the tables and was basically just one big empty area except for the huge mass of students that had developed. I rushed into the massive crowd where two different circles had formed. It was literally like being at a I taught adults at a vocational school, mostly from rough neighborhoods. We had been warned to never try to break up a fight, as many of these students carried knives and so forth. Some woman had a bad falling out with her group of friends and was sitting separated from them. They were talking back and forth, very loudly, very aggressively across the room. I couldn't control them and went to get a supervisor. With me and the supervisor guy there, one of the girls from the group came across the room at the odd one out. She is big, 6 feet and 250 pounds, and charges across the room at the odd one out, who is maybe 5 feet 2 inches. Supervisor gets in between them. They fight around him for a second. Then smaller woman slashes the face of bigger woman with a razor or something. That pretty much ended it. Other than a few thrown things and tussle. But a lot of hair and braids were ripped out and there was blood everywhere. Supervisor was lucky. They literally fought around him. And the smaller one whipped that blade over his right shoulder to slash the other one's face. This was on a Tuesday. And they were to effectively graduate on Thursday. Insane. The worst fight I broke up wasn't because of students getting hurt, but because of how lame it was. First off, I teach middle school, which is just one awkward moment after another. These two kids were arguing over a pencil because one kid supposedly broke the other kid's pencil. They were bickering back and forth like two old men and then they just broke out in really mediocre wrestling. It was embarrassing to watch because neither boy could even wrestle and I was able to just tell them to stop and send them to the office with no other issues. Another reason it was the lamest fight ever was because all the other students who were working at other tables went about their work and talking to each other and didn't even notice. Usually they would be chanting fight, fight, over and over and crowding around trying to film for World Star. I had a student who fought a few times in my class and was one of those blind rage type fighters who would just swing at anyone until he got back under control. He was manageable in my class but he was sent to homeschooling after a fight he got into in the hallways. Something stupid set him off, and he punched the other kid a few times before being restrained by one of the security guards, who he also punched in the face. During the same fight, a teacher was trying to separate the two students, and he accidentally, but still, broke 2 of her fingers. It dawned on me that day why they tell us to not get between students fighting. She was lucky that one, she wasn't hurt worse. And 2, that she wasn't written up on disciplinary charges for breaking that rule. I've only broken up a few fights, and they were pretty mundane, but if there is one thing I know is that girls' fights are worse than boys. Girls will go for your eyes, but boys typically stick to an honor code. No hits below the belt and all that. To add to that, Most guys I've seen fight tend to walk away from it with respect for each other. Girls tend to drag that grudge to the grave. I am an English teacher in France. This happened in the classroom next door to mine and I just witnessed the aftermath and heard the gossips from my friend who did break it up and was there to hear the story when they got hauled into the admin's office. One of my male students was named Timoth, who was dating a girl named Anna a year under him. One day last year he apparently left his phone unattended and unlocked and she picked it up and started searching through it. What Anna found was his very male best friend Louis texting and sending him nudes and talking about how much he loved him, and Tim was texting back and being equally enthusiastic about the two of them being together out in the open once they finished school and were in university. She proceeded to screenshot and send all those texts, SXTS and nudes to her boyfriend's parents before replacing his phone so he wouldn't know. Tim's parents are very conservative, and when I say very, I mean very. His mother once called me to complain about his grade in English and it evolved into a rant about foreign students that would make Marine Le Pen proud, and Anna knew, so that's why she went this revenge route. This kid went home to be blindsided thanks to her. And apparently he had to basically flee the house because he was afraid of his father literally killing him. Louis turned up to school the next day, calmly entered Anna's first period class and beat the ever-loving shit out of her. Just wailed on her. He was skinny thing but knew what he was doing, and she was super tiny and it was not a fair fight at all, and he just obliterated her. I just heard him screaming after he had been restrained, which is when I went to go check. She had a black eye and a broken eye socket and there was blood everywhere from her mouth and nose. Louis was borderline hysterical and screaming about her being a BTCH who ruined Tim's life. It was bad. Not a teacher. But in my low-income urban public school we had an actual riot, with students punching police officers, tripping the fire alarm, damaging property, and screaming obscenities. School was cancelled for 2 days as teachers reviewed security footage and suspended kids. Of course, it was a doozy to break up. A lot of dissatisfied kids in the cities. Honestly, a tiny part of me wants policy to be, well, let's let it burn itself out. Then again, the part of me that's going to be a teacher replies, what the FCK? Dude, they could get hurt. Double quote. I am not a teacher, but I have worked in K-12 IT for 10 years. So I have been in a lot of classrooms. Teachers aren't supposed to break up fights and usually get hurt trying to do so. That being said, the worst fight I saw was in a science lab. I was in the back of the lab installing some software to go with a digital microscope and a large 8th grade girl was singing disrespectfully while the teacher was talking. Tiny 8th grade girl behind her was getting pissed and telling her to shut up because she couldn't hear what the teacher was saying. Big girl continued to sing. Tiny girl says for the last time, shut the FCK up, I'm trying to learn. Then proceeds to leap over the lab table between them, grabs the big girl's hair and proceeds to bash her face into the table over and over again, screaming at her to shut the FCK up. They had to get a very large male administrator in there to pull her off. The teacher got elbowed in the face when she tried to step in, said screw it and ran out into the hall to get an admin. Fun times. My dad is a 5 feet 6 inches Hispanic dude. Gentlest person you can imagine. His first teaching job was at a rough high school. 2 guys, both much bigger than him, got into it but security was nowhere to be found, so he tackled them both in a bear hug so all they could do was stare at each other and rage while my dad waited for reinforcements. Not a teacher but saw the craziest fight when I was in high school. There was girl, I'll call her girl A, who was mentally challenged. Rumors were she was a preemie born addicted to drugs. TTY home life. In foster care. Just all around crappy situation for her. She was about 4 minutes and 10 seconds in high school. Just a really little person. Well, this one girl, girl B, thought she was the prime target to bully. And, well, she picked the f-king wrong person to bully. B messes with A for a few weeks until the day A snaps. Here's the thing, in our high school we had the gates that drop down to close off corridors. You just hit the emergency release and the gates slam down and there's no leaving that corridor until the on-campus police officer comes to unlock it with a key. Never had these gates been used. Until B messed with A for the last time. Remember, A is mentally challenged and special needs. B is messing with A and all of a sudden A runs for the emergency release button for these gates to drop. Gates drop, it's A and B and a few bystanders stuck in the corridor. A beats the ever-loving shit out of B. Remember how the on-campus police officer has to unlock the gate with a key? Yeah. Well, that took a solid 5-6 minutes to go get the key and get back to the corridor. And by this time there's students on each end of the corridor pressed against the gates to watch the ass kicking that's happening. B ended up going to the hospital and never came back to school. Rumor was she was in alternative school for all the bullying and A ended up in a state psych ward. I was in class one day and my teacher was a nice 50-something-year-old sensitive nice man. These two freshmen, one small and thin but still a fighter and a really chubby guy, were roasting each other until the little guy got pissed and they went at it. They were throwing each other at the board and throwing punches and the whole class was in shock. My poor teacher had to step in but they did not want to stop and he was getting hit too. Finally some girl said help him. After 45 seconds of all of us staring in awe and they broke it up. My teacher said he was sore the next day lol. I used to teach high school in rural Georgia. I had to break up a fight between two girls and a heavily pregnant girl. I never taught these girls and it happened between classes in the hallway in front of my room. The pregnant girl was on the floor screaming and crying while one girl was kicking her in the head and one kicking her in the stomach. I grabbed each of them by their upper arms and hauled them away very hard. One fell back on her ass and the other nearly fell. The one on her ass started crying about how I'd hurt her. The other girl acted like she was going to rush me or the pregnant girl. I grabbed her, held her back, and told her that if she tried it again I'd make her wish she hadn't. She tried to hit me, and I twisted her arm until she was on the floor kneeling and screaming. Meanwhile, one of the other teachers helped the pregnant girl and another called the nurse principal. I was the only one to act for a good 30-40 seconds. Obligatory, not a teacher, but my high school has had some fights. Here's a few stories. 1. One day, a small, skinny kid incited a fight with an extremely large, 300 pounds of pure muscle kid after picking on him all day. So, after a single punch is thrown, the giant picks up the small one, puts him over his head, and then smashes him down into the ground. Faster first. There was blood everywhere. On the floor, on the walls, and especially on the kid's face. 2. As the entire school exited a pep rally, a fight between two girls breaks out in the middle of a large crowd of students. Weaves flew. It took several teachers to finally stop the fight. Also, a security guard decided it would be a great idea to use pepper spray on said fighters. Despite literally the entire school was all crowded around in this small area. As expected, several students were hit with minor injuries, but one teacher got a direct hit to the face. My boyfriend is a security guard person at a high school in a pretty harsh area of LA and had to break up a fight between two girls who had found out their boyfriend was cheating on both of them. Weaves were pulled off. One bit the other's arm till she started to bleed. 2 black eyes, bloody noses. It was intense and the girls got suspended. That boyfriend just sat and watched with his friends, thinking he was the shitty. Also, one time, 2 guys got in a fight over who got the last piece of pizza during lunch. They broke each other's nose. Not a teacher. At my old high school I watched a guy with a skateboard chase after another guy, who I knew pretty well, accusing him of stealing weed money from his house. He caught up to the second guy, who was denying everything, and started bashing his face with the skateboard. My and about 50 other high schoolers watched through the plate glass windows of the cafeteria as the guy was repeatedly thrown against that same glass. We all just stood there yelling and being generally stupid. Then a girl who I was pretty good friends with and who had no connection to either of the guys marched up yelling at the first guy to stop. She's a wrestler and football player and well known for being kind but very buff and strong. She somehow sent the first guy on his way and helped up the bleeding kid. Definitely the best fight I've seen on campus for the amount of blood and the awesome girl. Side note. Don't feel bad for the bleeding boy. He's an asshole and probably did steal the weed lol. I'm not a teacher, but my high school put a jukebox in our cafeteria one year and for $1 you could play 3 songs. So these 3 girls put in like $5 and played 50 Cents and Our Club on repeat. After the 4th or so repeat of the same song, some girl had had enough and went to unplug the jukebox. The 3 girls literally jumped her right there. Punches and hair flying everywhere. I'll give her the one girl CR. Young female high school teacher here. Worst fight I've broken up. A 250-pound kid pushed a 90-pound girl from behind, sending her skidding about 8 feet down the hallway on her stomach. She jumped up and shoulder checked him into the lockers and just started beating the shit out of this guy, punch after punch right into his face. I walked up behind her, grabbed her around the waist, and lifted her off of him as she continued to punch him. As I walked them to the office, she looked at me and said, "I don't even f***ing know who this guy is." Double quote. Worst fight I refused to step in and break up. The 2 largest, toughest guys in our school got into it in the hallway right in front of my classroom. These were the kind of boys that were already pretty much grown men and each had around 100 pounds of muscle on me. I heard yelling in the hallway and turned around just in time to witness one punch the other square in the teeth. He hit him so hard that I swear I could feel the vibrations in the air. Like, I felt the punch, it was so hard. And oh my god, the sound of it. They then started punching at each other as they rolled around the ground in a huge pile of blood that had come from the one's mouth after the first punch. I would have gotten hurt breaking it up. I internally said FCK that and called the office to tell them to send out police resource officer and admins down there ASAP to break up the fight of the decade. 2 girls started fighting out of nowhere outside and there were no other staff around to help me break it up. I ran up to one of the girls I had a good relationship with and attempted to hold her back. What I actually did was tied both of her arms up behind her back, allowing the other girl to punch her at will because there was no one there to hold her back. It was literally like in the movies when one bully grabs the kid and the other proceeds to beat the crap out of them. I was able to swing her around and shield her with my back, but it was too late, the damage was done. She got her nose broken and a cut on her eye. I felt so bad. I was just cleaning up my ass rack today and the pair of SS I was wearing that day still has drops of her blood on them from. I'm a school bus driver. My first year driving I got the bad school kids living in houses with boarded up windows kind of neighbor I picks up in. But I was the only ride these kids had and I loved them. A few small fights in the afternoon but nothing really bad all year till mid-June. I pull up to my first stop and there's Tommy on top of his sister Jane. Tommy was in grade 1. Jane in grade 2. Their older brother Billy was yelling at them. I saw this from afar. I sped up, slammed on the brakes, AMD flew out of my bus without thinking. Ripped Tommy off of Jane. He still had the wire in his hand. He was trying to kill her. Now, being in the neighborhood I was in, I couldn't send him home. So I threw him on the bus, not really, and made him sit up front with all other kids at least 3 rows away. Took him into the school. I held his hand and his sister's, and we walked into the principal's office. The principal seemed like he didn't care. And I didn't see Tommy the rest of the year. No one told me what happened. That was over 5 years ago. We lost the run to another company. So I don't know how he's doing. Just a quick note. Jane could breathe. No marks on her neck and she was okay physically. Clear airway and all. Older brother Billy said it happened as I turned around the corner. I still think if I had a cell radio I would've called 911. My father worked at a hickey school. The place where the Baltimore City public school system sends any student that was deemed emotionally disturbed. So he essentially taught permanent ice to kids like Kennard. Performing restraints on fighting students dislocated his finger bone to the point of requiring pins, which meant he couldn't go swimming when we went down the ocean. And on another occasion he tore his rotator cuff. These days he teaches a much more quiet job at the state prison. I was a student in American civics my senior year. And for the majority of it, a student teacher taught it. Awesome guy. Was really passionate about politics but kept his own personal political views private. He was great at his job. And I learned a lot from him. He encouraged us to care about our government without making anyone feel like they were wrong for their opinions. One day two kids were f***ing around. One pissed the other off and fists started flying. Our student teacher tried to break them up and yelled one student's name in a big booming voice that scared the shit out of all of us. We all froze. Including the two fighting. Here was this great student teacher who always had a great attitude suddenly using his scary voice and holy FCK did it work. Even the hot shitty kids who acted tough sat straight up and just stared wide-eyed. He walked them both down. And when they didn't need him anymore, he came back and went, well, that was a first for me. In his usual chipper attitude. And that was the day I learned not to FCK with a student teacher. I had to tackle a 6th grade boy that had a 5th grade girl by her hair on her knees, pounding her face in with brass knuckles. He broke her face in several places and knocked out most of her front teeth because he had asked her out and she said she was too young to date. The kid fought me like crazy while I had him pinned, kicking, pushing us across the grass so that my face is digging a trough into the field, trying to bite me, spitting on me, all while I'm thinking, I just bum rushed and tackled a student. I'm going to get fired. I laid on top of him until the cops got there. They investigated what happened and I wasn't in any trouble because the general consensus was that he could have killed her and I went with the least violent way to subdue him and I didn't injure him. The 5th grade girl spent some time in the hospital and had to have some mild facial reconstruction surgery. The boy went to juvenile hall. When I was teaching high school in Baltimore, I was walking down the hall during my plan time when I heard the sounds of fighting in a classroom. I poked my head in and saw Sam, this big, sweet kid who I taught, with another kid pinned to the floor, flat laying on top of him, hands pinned, etc. Sam is so big that this other kid is totally immobilized. Sam isn't doing anything to him. I think I can talk Sam into letting the kid go. I didn't know the other kid. So I bent down next to him and talked to him for a minute. I finally convince him to sit up. As soon as he starts to push back, the other kid gets his arm free and swipes at Sam with a knife none of us knew he was holding, except Sam. Sam had special needs. And I'm not sure if he just didn't think to tell us about the knife, or if he was trying not to snitch. Narrowly missed my face and neck. And Sam had him pinned back to the ground before any further attempts could be made. We let him stay that way until the police arrived. I don't get involved in fights anymore. I was an intervention specialist in a math class with my co-teacher. Two girls in the class were working, but began to exchange words out of nowhere. I tried my best to redirect them, but once one of them mentioned the other's mom, it was about to go down. Desks flew across the room as one girl stormed towards the other and grabbed her by the hair. There was slapping, scratching, and hair pulling. The other students were egging them on as I tried to separate them by holding one of them back, which I really should not have been doing. My co-teacher was standing there for a good 30 seconds before I had to yell at him to get security to help break the fight up. I only had a couple bruises from the desks and there was one girl's weave all over the floor of the classroom. I was with my 8th grade homeroom class when a student pointed out a fight outside at the 9th graders' lunch. I hopped out my window and ran up on the most pathetic fight ever. Two kids dancing circles, cutting every threat on earth and not throwing a single punch. Pretty sure their friends forced them into the face-off and neither had the guts to initiate. I walked them both to the office and let our principal know how the fight had gone. Strangely, one of them ended up being my neighbor years later and broke into a widow's house and sexually assaulted her at knife point. Wish he had remained a coward instead of finally acting on something. Alcohol played a large role. Well, I work with preschoolers. Worst fight I've seen is a fight over who gets the rainbow-shaped block. Kid decides to steal the block from his friend's hand and smacked his friend in the head with it. This causes a whole cycle of things, and before I know it, there's blocks everywhere and someone peed their pants. I work in an alternative high school 6-1-1 program. Just a couple weeks ago I broke up a fight in the gym, and once the students were separated, one of them punched a para in the jaw and buckled his knees. I've had a kid sucker punch another student because he didn't like the way he was talking to a girl. He broke his jaw. Had a boy that bit down on a girl's hand because of an argument in art and she couldn't get him to let go, so she was clawing at his eyes. Got in between two students in the cafeteria who had started to fight, and one of them hit me with a full strawberry parfait. Later, once the parfait dried, my shirt was crusted into a crumpled wad near my shoulder where I had been grabbed. Those were all from this year. Been there for 12. I love that place. Totally not a teacher, unfortunately. I grew up in an area in Oss with a strong Sikh Indian community. They are the reason the town was flourishing and still is today. But being the minority, they were picked on at school and bullied. Anyway, one of the Indians wasn't taking any shit one day and got into a fight. The fight was going like every other fight does until the Indian kid slipped his silver bracelet over his knuckles and punched this other kid in the mouth. It was horrific. The guy who got punched went into shock as he realized his face was now mangled. He was missing 4 teeth and had his nose broken. I used to supervise the after-school program run by my local IMCA. There were 2 girls, one in 4th grade, the other in 2nd, would not stop physically fighting or leave one another alone for even a moment. It culminated in the 2nd grader wrapping a sweatshirt around the older girl's neck and choking her with it. The 4th grader responded by kicking the 2nd grader as hard as she could between her legs. I've witnessed pain and outbursts and tantrums like you wouldn't believe, but this 2nd grader screamed louder than I thought possible. She tossed stuff off of every table in the room, and children actually fled the cafeteria to join the kindergarten group back in the gym. Thankfully I don't work there anymore, and some days I say to myself, today was tough, but at least a 4th grade girl didn't kick me in the crotch as hard as she could. Double quote.